Welcome back to Formerly Wedded. This is episode... How do you say 4 in German?
Wir.
Wir.
Wir. V-I-E-R.
Wir. It's very long.
Very long.
I'm having such a hard time with acclimating to German. There's so many syllables. I don't understand. It seems so counterproductive to have such a long word. It's a lot.
It is a lot. It's a very interesting language though, because you have those videos where people will do the measurements of how long the word is or how the connotation is when you pronounce it, and it's 7 other languages and they all sound very similar, and then German's and you're like, why are they so angry?
I like how Silas is he's just taking to it so well, and he'll just spew out a bunch of sounds, and I'm like, what? And he's like, oh, that means. And you talk to everyone for us. Because that's one thing for me when I travel, I find it extremely important to try at least to speak the local language. My brain can't with German.
I actually feel very comfortable here with the
because you are German.
Yeah, I feel like I've been able to, but it has definitely taken me out of a massive comfort zone.
Oh, for sure.
Because this is my first time ever leaving the States. I had a passport for work for 10 years and never got it stamped. And I just renewed at the beginning of this year and now have finally gotten a stamp after 10 years of having a passport. So I'm you talk about sheltered American. I am the cliche of that. I can say some stuff in Spanish because that's so ubiquitous in America, but...
And you even grew up in Florida.
Yeah.
You should be fluent in Spanish.
Yeah, and I'm not at all.
My dumbass took French in high school.
Yeah, but that's pretty close though.
Yeah, they're really close. Sometimes I, in my mind, I can't remember. So I have a lot of French friends that I actually met in Indonesia and I keep in touch with, and sometimes I'm speaking with them and I can very, very, very mildly communicate in a little bit of French. But it's because I'm wait, is this French or Spanish? So,
well,
bien. But I think that's also good in French.
This is how much of a dumb American I am. Every time I'm out, I'm about to say hola. That's the only
No one's even brown here.
So, with that being said, I think bringing up Indonesia is a good step into the next part of the journey, that is our separation, because last year, at the beginning of 2023, I remember you coming to me and letting me know that you wanted to take a trip out of the country and just have some time for yourself.
Was that the beginning of the year?
Yeah, it was pretty close to the beginning. It was probably February or March. And for the past few summers, since we've lived in Dallas since 2022, I've been off and on staying in a camper trailer. And so during the summer, the first summer we were in Texas, I took the kids to a big long trip. And then I remember when you brought that up to me, I was like, yeah, well, that works because I'm already taking the kids on a trip. Now, here's another ego check moment for myself, which was much easier than the previous one that we talked about in the last episode, which was when you asked me to take off work so you could do this trip. So I worked 28 days on and off, 4 weeks back and forth. And I don't really deviate from that, and my personality is such.
Except to work extra.
Yeah, and the only time I would ever deviate from that is to pull in extra work. But, that's not it's not a terrible quality, of course, because that's something that I'm trying to do to,
It's not a terrible quality, but it is a good note because, you've never, ever, throughout our whole marriage and since we've been separated, ever taken time off.
No.
When I gave birth Silas and Scarlett, you went back to work within a week of having them. Um, there were just, it didn't matter what was happening at home. When you went to work, you went to work. And if there was an opportunity for extra time, you took it. And I never got in the way of that for you.
Yes, yeah.
I never asked you to take time off. I never asked you to leave work. I never asked you to not do whatever you needed to do or to be there. And I think that's a really important thing to note, because I don't think many people really understand the amount of time we really spent apart
Yeah.
throughout the majority of our marriage.
Yeah, and a good note too is understanding a little more to the depth of what it means for families that live like this. You know, military families, people that work offshore, people that work
Just
commercial
whatever.
airline pilots, whatever your job may be. Is I have friends that they worked 28 days on and 14 days off, so they worked 4 weeks on and 2 weeks off, and they did that for 10 years, and it's like, it's crazy to think about that. And I look back at all the time that I missed, quote unquote, and during those times, I just always felt like that was what I had to do. That this is what I have to do to make sure that we are okay, without recognizing that we're gonna be okay. Like we're gonna make it. Just be more, be better with your money, and you're fine. But with all that being said, it was a very important distinction that you made, because 15 years you had never asked me to, stay home, and I didn't even have we didn't have a fight about it. We didn't have any kind of like bad blood or anything. It was more just in my mind. I had a little bit to work through. Like when you said it, I was like, oh,
take time off.
Yeah,
I remember you saying like, I don't even know how to do that, and I'm like, you email your operations manager and say, hey, I need these dates off.
Yeah.
Can you get a relief for me? And then I remember when you did it, you're like, that was so easy. And I'm like, are you for real right now?
Yeah.
So the reason that I had asked him to take time off was because I was at a point in my own process of healing. I was working through so much complex trauma from my childhood. I just lived in a perpetual state of chaos and turmoil and things that had just stayed with me for so long, that leaving our marriage was part of leaving our marriage was letting all of that go, because what I brought into the marriage and what your expectation of me was did not allow me to grow beyond any of that. And so I had been doing my work. I really committed myself to it when our oldest son was about 2 years old. I remember having a moment where, he was just being 2, and anybody who knows that is that age will just fucking test your mettle. And I had a new baby at the time as well, and he was just battling with me, that 2-year-old Will, and I would feel so much fury. And it wasn't him, because I understood cognitively that he was just being a toddler that didn't understand anything. And thankfully I also understood that between the two of us, like, our kids were going to have a strong will and a hard head. And so I remember having this moment where I just wanted to scream. And I looked at him and I'm like, how can I allow this little child to agitate me in such a way that I am like losing a handle on my emotions? And that was when I was like, I can't pass on what I had experienced, the things that I know were detrimental to my own development. What kind of person am I if I just perpetuate that? So that was, he was 2, so we were like 2 years into our marriage, and So I was like a decade-ish into like really intentionally being in my work, but it was so psychological. Like for me, I started working through the mindset of everything, and the somatic side of my work came much later. And this was when I started getting into more of like the spiritual and physical healing. And so I got to this point that, gosh, it was only last summer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got to a point where I was working through, I'm always working through fear, like noticing where the fear stems from, going into that place and putting myself in the uncomfortable position that is necessary to really sit with it and process it and transmute it and move on from it. And the trip to Bali came because I had so much fear around just things about being a mother, being the primary and often sole caregiver to the kids. I was so hyper focused always on their well-being to where I didn't really let anyone else take care of our kids. It was like our parents, my sister, and that was it. I never left our kids with anyone. So for, what was that, 14 years at that point, I had spent maybe a week max away from the kids. And that was only in, recent years since we split up. And so I knew that for me to deal with being able to sit with, they can be okay without me. They will be like other people, you can take care of them and be at peace with that. Because one of my big fears about death was, like, I've never really been afraid to die, right? Like, I grew up in a situation where I was like, take me. And then I lived in a body that suffered from chronic pain. And so I was always in this state of like, just let me out of this prison, right?
Yeah.
Like, my life was a prison, my body was a prison, everything was miserable, and I didn't have a real fear of dying. But then when I became a mom, I feared dying too soon because I feared leaving my kids and not being the one to take care of them. And so for me, going on this trip meant I needed to remove myself as far away as I could, because even when I did go away from the kids, I always made sure that I was still accessible in an emergency. And how much further from Dallas, Texas can you get than Indonesia? Like, literally, you can't. I looked it up. You cannot get any further. It is completely opposite of the world. And so I had to get as far away as I possibly could for as long as I could manage to really, really, like, soak in that space. And I knew that I had to do that. So the reason I had asked you to take time off was because that type of trip, in your 4 weeks off, I could have maybe like left the kids for a couple of days on the front end and left early or whatever, but I was like, it's just not going to be enough. And so I said, if you take a couple of weeks off, then I will have the peace of mind of knowing that they're with you. So that will help a little bit, because you are the only other person that I trust to take care of them the way that I will and protect them that way. And so the first 2 weeks they were with your parents, and then you took off and you had them for 6 weeks, and that gave me about 8 weeks to travel. And that was not easy, but I was really grateful when you agreed to it, because you understood why and what I was trying to do. And so, yeah, we didn't have any conflict over it. It was just something that you were like, ooh, it was an uncomfortable space for you to work through as well. But I knew that it would be really good because you had also never spent that long with the kids on your own.
Yeah. It was, it really, by that point in who I was, since it wasn't that long ago, about a year ago now, when you started asking the question about doing this trip and stuff, it wasn't that hard of a pill to swallow, because like you said, it was like a little bit of like, oh, that's interesting. I've never even thought about that. And as soon
take
as
time off. What?
yeah, and as soon as I thought about it, like I just immediately started getting all these ideas. Like, oh yeah, well, then I can go here and I can do this, and like, I mean, the kids and I had such a epic adventure for weeks at a time because I was actually home to do that, you know. And that's, I would say that will probably fall into one of the most formative, memorable times that I spent with them, you know, individually.
Y'all
with
bonded
them.
deeply that summer.
We did. So, anyways,
yeah, so I set out on this trip and I was like, okay, so what the hell am I going to do in Indonesia for 2 months? And I decided I was already going to do yoga teacher training because my best friend in Dallas was she owns a yoga studio, and she was just organizing her first teacher training. And so I was going to do her teacher training, and then I decided to go travel. And so I was going to end up missing the first like 2 or 3 weeks of teacher training. So I decided to do it in Bali because then I could do a 3-week immersive program and just be fully present. And I found a fantastic schools, like everything just fell right into place. The same amount of money that I was going to spend to do it in Dallas, I spent in Bali, and that covered my room and board for being there for 3 weeks. And so it was kind of a no-brainer. And I got to be with people like-minded and share the experience with them. And I figured at the end of 3 weeks, I'll have a little direction of where I'm going to go beyond that. And then a girlfriend of mine, the one who was like, we talked about last episode, our oldest friends that I had known since I was like 13. She decided that she was going to come as well. She has an aunt that lives in Bali, and she'd been wanting to go to Bali. And so when I told her that I was going to go, I asked her if she could connect me with her aunt, just so there is someone there that I can reach out to with questions or SOS or like some kind of contact on the ground. And so she connected us, and then a few days later she's like, you know what, I'm going to come too. And so she planned to come out and meet me when I got out of teacher training. And then that was its own a whole thing, and we ended up going our separate ways, which I was grateful for because I had originally, my intention was to travel alone. My plan was to go and do my own thing. And when she decided to come, I welcomed it. I was happy to have the company. But then when we had a falling out while we were there, I also took that as like, okay, I was supposed to do this alone. And all of my plans after leaving teacher training were in conjunction with her. And so she dropped my bags at the cafe I was eating at and bounced and left me sitting there. And so I had no idea where to go. I had no plans. I had no reservations made for anything. And so suddenly I was just sitting in this cafe with all of the stuff that I had and an open end. And so I decided that there was this tiny island a couple hours off the coast of Bali that had just been calling to me. And I was like, well, I guess now's a good time to go there. And I did, and I'm so grateful that all of that happened because I went and I had the most incredible experience, and I met just such phenomenal people, and I met my French guru, this older guy that I met on the island just walking through, and we started chatting, and this man just has such an incredible life and amazing stories, and we could speak to each other on a level that we were both like, you don't often find people like he and I do not often find others that we can connect with on that level.
Yeah.
And so we just developed an immediate friendship, and I immediately like could look at it all and go, this is why I'm here. This is why everything happened. It was never about me coming to Bali. It was about me going here. Before I even met him and some of the others that I met on the island, I was like, this place just feels like home. I've never stepped foot on another part of this earth that feels so much like home. And it was reflected in my social media because I was getting so many comments and so many messages, and people are like, you look so happy. I've never seen you so at peace. Like, you just look like you are where you belong. And I'm like, if I didn't have kids to go home to, I would not leave.
Yeah.
And so I spent almost 2 weeks there until I had to start making my journey back, which I detoured to Australia and then came home. And in those 2 weeks, I had so much profound just growth and awareness. And he spoke to me on such a soul level that he said things to me that he had no reason to. He had no knowledge of why he was saying certain things to me, but he said them, and it was exactly what I needed. So I guess I forgot.
I was gonna say, you kind of forgot a big element of all of this.
I know. So when I was in teacher training, I was about a week and a half, almost 2 weeks into being away from home. And it was the first time that I had in my adult life had that much time and space where it was only about me. I didn't have anyone else to worry about, because even prior to having kids, I had siblings that I was constantly, concerned about taking care of. I didn't even, like in high school, I didn't even really drink or do any of the partying or anything, because there were times where my younger siblings would call me and I would have to rush home to take care of them or be present for something. There were times that I wasn't going to be home in time, so I had to call the police and send them there. So there was not a point in my life where it was just about me.
Yeah.
And being in Bali, it was the first time that I could really just turn off worrying about everyone else and everything else. And that was why I asked you to have the kids, because we could have left them with a grandparent or something, but I would have stayed very, very connected, very concerned, like on top of things. And unfortunately, both of my kids will never be alone with either of my parents ever. They've never been with my dad. They'll never be with my mom again either. But and your parents are just they grandparent in their own way, and so to leave our kids with any of their grandparents almost kind of has always made us feel like we were burdening them. And so I knew I wouldn't be able to really lean into the experience that I was creating for myself and what I needed. And so that's why it was important that they were with you, because if they burden you, that's your own problem. And I knew that, no one else in this world cares about them the way that I do except you.
Yeah.
And so it gave me the space to really just dial down all of the mom chatter in my brain and not feel like I needed to be focused on what was going on back home. And by turning all of that off, it created space for me for the first time in my life to really just be with myself. And in that space, I started having old memories and things come to the surface. And they are things that I had an awareness of them existing. I know that you and I had conversations over the years that I knew there was stuff that I didn't know.
Yeah.
But I didn't know the details of it. I just knew that it was there. It was like, there's this locked door and I can hear the rumbling and I don't know what it is. I know it's there, but as long as the door is going to stay locked, I'm not going to mess with it. And having that much space sort of blew the hinges off the door, and all of that came out. And it actually came out in a very unexpected way. My roommate, who, she wasn't even supposed to be my roommate, we got paired together as roommates the day that teacher training started. She had a different roommate, and her roommate decided to like have her own room and at last minute, so then they put us together. And we were so grateful, because we were just like, yes, you and me, you know, we just immediately clicked. And she does Reiki and Akashic Records reading. And
I think you should explain Akashic Records real quick, because
I'm about to.
Okay, sorry. I didn't know if you're going to move on.
No.
Okay.
I was going to say, and I understand that many people will kind of like, what? The Akashic Records are, if you, whatever your beliefs are, just stay with me for a moment. Your soul carries on its own, your soul is your soul being. We don't maintain our physical worldly identity throughout however many lifetimes or experiences we have, but our soul is always the same constant being that it is. And the Akashic Records are the records of your soul's experiences through each and every lifetime, down to every moment, every thought, every action, every word, every experience is recorded. And this exists in a place that's similar. Now that we have technology, it's so much easier for people to comprehend this, because yeah, it's like the cloud. So I don't know where my phone is, but you will like take a picture or whatever on the device, and then the device connects to the cloud and the internet and all of that. And where this phone is not capable of storing all of that information, it is the conduit through which you can access all of that information and pull it into the phone. You can download it, you can look at it briefly, or whatever. You can upload to it. And so people who read the Akashic Records are like the phone, where they're the conduit to go into your records and pull that information. And you can find lots of information on the internet. I will also include her contact information in this video, because she's just such a beautiful and incredible soul, and she incorporates all of her gifts with the Akashic Records and Reiki and yoga into these phenomenal sessions that she works with people. And I did not learn this until much later, that she generally is like, she draws in people who are sexual abuse and molestation survivors. And I didn't realize that at the time, and I didn't realize it until much later. But I do see in retrospect why we were put as roommates.
Wow, that's crazy.
And beyond that, like, I just adore her. Yeah, we met and we were like, I love you.
That's another, like, there's been so many moments like that throughout all of this over the past year and a half, but let's keep going.
So one night, about midway through teacher training, she agreed to to go into my records for me. And the way that it works is she has her process. It's like a ceremony, and then she just is the conduit. You can speak to the records. I don't know. I always kind of imagine it like a library, and she can allow the librarian to speak through her. And so you can ask questions, and you can receive guidance and everything, and she just completely removes herself from the experience. And so the very first thing that came to her when she opened my records was, she was like, I'm hearing this song, and it's The Lightning Strikes.
Yeah.
Who was that? Garth Brooks? I think
Maybe.
it was Garth Brooks. It's that old song, "The Lightning Strikes" and "Thunder Rolls" and all
Yeah.
that. So and it's so interesting because that song there is a memory from my childhood where that song was playing, and I don't have a lot of clear memories because of the amount of trauma that I experienced. There's a lot of like mostly black space there, blank spaces. But I've always carried this memory of this song, and so as soon as she said that, I was like, okay, there's something to this, right? Because I'm a very open skeptic. I will I I will not resist, but I won't like just dive into anything as biblical truth, right?
Yeah.
And so the very first thing she mentioned was that song, and it connected me to a period of my childhood. And then we went through more conversation and everything in the records, and she never told me anything. She just answered the questions, and the questions guided me. And in that moment, it was like thing that the that was when the hinges blew off. And it was like all of these memories that I knew were there, but I couldn't make sense of, and I wasn't really aware of what they were, started to come into focus. And they were memories that had to do with my mom's dad and sexual abuse from when I was a kid. And I had no idea how to process that or navigate that. And so I reached out to my siblings. I have 3 siblings that I grew up with, and then I have a half brother who was the age of our kids. And I reached out to them, and first I reached out to his ex-wife. And I didn't tell her all the details of everything. I said, look, I'm having some memories that have been coming up. And there were always accusations about him. There were always things. I mean, my dad is an angry person, but he usually just kind of is like whatever is pissing him off in the moment. However, when it comes to my mom's dad, he has always hated him. Like at the sound of his name or
Yes.
anything will just set him off. And so I reached out to his ex-wife. She was like my grandmother was always alive and around and present in my life, so she was the step grandma, I guess. She was there. I've known her my whole life. But they had been divorced for about 10 years at that point, or I guess by now they're divorced about 10 years. And I told her, and she just said, he is exactly what you think he is. Protect your kids. And about a month before I left for Bali, my sister had asked me, she said, Mom wants for my nephew to go and visit her. And she's like, I don't know. And I said, don't do it. Don't, because he was living with her already at that point. And she's like, I'm just not really comfortable with it. And I said, don't do it. And then this happened, and then she confirmed, because her daughter was one that I had always heard from being much younger, heard accusations, and my mom always said, no matter what the situation with him was, she always made him the victim. So she demonized her stepsister and said, oh, she just doesn't like him. She wants them to get divorced. She's trying to ruin their marriage, blah, blah, blah. And then he had been arrested probably, I don't know, 8, 9 years ago for public indecency and being naked on his front porch in front of a minor neighbor. And apparently he was touching himself, and that is there's news articles, you can find the arrest records. And again, she blamed it on he was confused, he's on a new heart medicine, he didn't understand what he was doing. But I'm like, how does heart medicine affect your mental faculties to that degree? But again, this is just like a lifetime of convoluted. I never had any reason not to trust my mom, and where she spoke, I would abandon my own sense of knowing, and whatever my internal
your
thing
gut.
was, yes, whatever my gut was telling me, I believed my mom instead. And so I knew that bringing this to her was not going to be easy. His most recent wife had a young-ish, like, teenage daughter when they got married, and apparently there were some accusations about him being inappropriate with her. And even whether or not her child was his child, like, when I say it's fucked up, it is fucked up. And my mom's just always normalized everything to whatever degree she possibly could. So I had confirmation from she's my step grandmother for ease, and I then took all of that to my siblings. I sent them screenshots of everything, and no one had any trouble believing it, because it is the energy around him. And then I said, I'm not going to say anything to my parents until I get back stateside, because I just don't know how to handle this situation right now. And also, I'm in the middle of this intensive program where we're doing 14-hour days of yoga and learning the history of all of everything yogi related, and it was amazing, and I wanted to be present for it. And so I was kind of like, I have to compartmentalize all of this stuff and just get through the last week of this program. And then I had put up a video on Instagram. Some of the girls and we had a free day, and we went to, there was like this little secret beach, and there was a bat cave, and you got to crawl under the rocks into the cave. And so I put this video up of me crawling into the bat cave, and he commented on it and said, "Love that ass." And as soon as I saw that, there was one day that I skipped classes, and it was this day, and I was sitting there and I was just like journaling, and I was just trying to collect myself to finish getting through this program. And then I saw that comment pop up, and I just lost it. It was, as I was trying to compartmentalize everything, it was like, abso-fucking-lutely not. You are going to deal with this right here, right now. And that comment came through to force me to do that. And so I screenshotted it and I sent it to my parents. And my dad, at first because I called him first, and I was like, "Why do you hate him so much?" And he was like, "Who?" And he just kind of, the avoidance thing. He wouldn't really tell me anything. He likes to keep a lot of secrets, and I don't know. It's weird and very messed up, the games that people play, and I don't think it's really intentional, but it's to keep your own head in the sand. And so he kind of played dumb, and then I told him everything, and then he started getting upset, and he started crying, and he started feeling all these waves, which he's a very emotionally dysfunctional person. And so it started like becoming about him, and I was like, I can't deal with you right now. I can't. And that's why it was so easy for me in our marriage to coddle your feelings and to let your feelings be the priority, because that was what I was accustomed to with my dad. It didn't matter what the situation was. When his feelings got involved, they were the most important thing.
Yeah.
And so I just stopped communicating with him. I just was all the way around the world. I was alone. My reality was imploding. My mom was I sent her the screenshot, and her response was, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry."
Well, that was actually me, I think, because you sent it to me first.
No, I sent it.
You sent it to them first?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because I want to little side story. I had been drinking that night, and I don't drink very much. And that night, I had heard from her a few days prior, and so that night I had actually let myself go way beyond the point of where I ever should have been, because I was using alcohol to numb my feelings, and I got drunk and actually don't remember most of the night. I mean, I remember once I sobered up and started, like, you know, getting pissed off and everything, but I remember screenshotting it, sending it to them as well, but I didn't realize that, because we haven't talked about it that much, so this is...
Yeah, no, I've never heard your side of it, because I just I couldn't make space in any part of me for how anyone else was experiencing this whole moment.
Yeah.
And so I sent it, and my mom was like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." And that was her response. And he lived with her at that point in time. And that was when I just, like, I told her, I was like, I know about this sexual abuse. I wasn't going to talk to you about any of this. I know these things. And she's like, "What are you talking about? He never sexually abused me." And I was like, wow, it really is always about them. And that was the moment where I brought this to both of my parents, and they both made it all about them. And I wasn't surprised, because there was never any point where I made myself the center of things.
Yeah.
And my brother-in-law actually made that point, because it became this whole thing. And for whatever freaking reason, my brother-in-law decided to take this opportunity to... He was being supportive, offering whatever help he could. However, I decided to move forward with dealing with it. And made it about him. And he decided to take that moment to air all of his grievances of how I am as a person, what his issues with me have been. At that point, it had been about 1.5 years that my sister and I weren't really... They got married, and then a month later, she and I just had this huge falling out that made no sense to me whatsoever. And regardless, not to get too much into that, he came out that he was being supportive, and then he was like, "But actually, while we're on the topic of your life falling apart, let me tell you all the issues that I have with you. One of which being that I left you."
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is... It's hard for me to even talk about, because it is so much and it's so overwhelming.
Yeah.
That
I can feel it.
I didn't even know how to function in that moment, and so I just had to keep going and keep pressing through each class and every day and every moment. And I was so grateful that Dulce was the one that was my roommate, who opened the can of worms, because she was the person that was there beside me the whole time. And she gave such loving support in the best way possible, because she did not smother me with anything. She just kind of was like, "Go do what you got to do. I'll be here if you need anything." And then I had another friend who was in our class as well. And on our last day off before the final little chunk of, I think like every 4th day we had a break. And so on our last break day, he rented a scooter, and he was like, "Come on, I got a scooter." And we just drove up the coast. We drove probably 1/4 of a way around the island and spent the whole day. He just drove the scooter. I was just taking it in, didn't have to talk, didn't have to do anything, and it was so much of what I needed at that time. So I'm so grateful that there were a couple of people there that really just sort of like, it was like a delicate little egg or something, because I had to turn it all off. I had to turn off everything that was happening back home, because it felt like everything was being either disregarded or I was being attacked in some way. And so I ended up sending a message to my siblings, and I was like, look, this is the last message you're going to get from me. I do not have the capacity. I have literally nothing in me. The tiny bit of what I have left inside of me, I have to preserve for myself so I can get through what I'm doing and being away and being in a foreign place and trying to continue to function and exist as my entire reality is just crumbling. And I had always tried really hard to be like where our parents were not functional. I had always tried really hard to hold that space for my siblings, so that, because I'm the second oldest but the oldest girl, and I was the first to get married, the first to really like establish any sort of stability in my life. And I even told you when we got married, I was like, look, I come with my siblings. They were basically like, it was like marrying a single mom for you in a way, because I was like, I have to be the one to be there and take care of them, support them, because our parents are incapable of doing so. And so he didn't really have much of a choice, because I told him off the bat, I was like, you can either like not accept that, and I get it, or that's the way it is. And so throughout our marriage, my siblings lived with us for the first 8 years, 9 years,
Well,
most of our marriage.
No, most of our marriage, everyone lived with us. You know, each three of them, the three of them, lived with us multiple times, and your mom even lived with us for a while, you know, several months. And so, yeah, it's like we have been kind of like a home to most everyone there.
Yeah. And
that was something that I saw that I respected a lot about you, because that shows a deep bond of care for the people around you and your family, and that shows a lack of selfishness, or that lack of like you're on your own, you're an adult now. No, it's your family. I'm always going to care about you.
Well, and that was always my goal, was that I never had anywhere to turn to. When I was 18, I broke up with the boyfriend that I was living with. That was my like high school sweetheart. And so I had nowhere to live, and my mom let me pay her rent so I could sleep on her couch. And that was kind of how we ended up together, because you got kicked out of your parents' house for getting the dog. And I already had no home, so we're like, well, let's get an apartment.
Yeah.
And so again, even before we got married, our relationship was about being a team. It was always more about, it's easier to do this together than it is alone.
Yeah.
And then we got an apartment, and then I got pregnant.
Yeah.
And so I sent that message to my siblings, just being like, I have nothing to give you. Where I don't think that even still they realize it, that everything I did was much like a mother. I didn't do anything that would take me away from being available to them, even in getting married, And so I told him, I was like, I don't have anything for you. Like, I just can't. I could barely exist. I didn't know how to exist anymore. Every part of my reality had just been shattered based on the way that my mom reacted, because growing up, my dad was so what is like
tyrannical.
Yeah, it was like there was so much chaos. Yeah. You never knew what you were gonna get from him. You never knew.
Tasmanian devil.
You never knew what type of energy he was gonna have. So my mom was the one. She was my stability. She was the rock. And it was like, if I looked at my mom and she was okay, and things were like, at least she was at peace or not worried or whatever, then I knew she was the metric by which I built my stability off of.
Yeah.
And she was highly unstable in retrospect. I just didn't know that as a child.
Sure.
But it wasn't until that experience last summer that I really realized how much of my own sense of well-being and security, and like, if you're okay, the world's okay and I can get through this day. I didn't realize how intensely integrated into her I was in that way. And she always allowed me to be, because she always, like, I was the oldest girl. And so she leaned onto me for everything.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. And I always did whatever I could to fulfill whatever the needs were. And I just felt for her so much, and I pitied her. And I realized now that she really wanted that pity. Because she majorly took advantage of knowing that I would just give and do for anything that she needed. I always felt a responsibility to, like, make up for the way all the men in her life had failed her, because even though she was obsessed with her dad, he would just ignore her. Yeah. And he would go months without communicating with her, and the second he would then pick up the phone and say, hey, I need something, she would drop everyone and everything and go to him, which is what happened that Thanksgiving when she
Before
left and the kids and I were alone, because we were supposed to have Thanksgiving together, and he finally decided to call her, and she just bailed. And I was like, well, if I'm this alone, like, if I'm that low of a priority, then why would I stay here because of you, you know?
Yeah.
And so, then I understood that my siblings were also having their own difficult time with all of it, because it was also their family. But I couldn't, for the first time, I couldn't think about them before myself. And some of them took that message as like you need to choose between me and your mom, yeah. Which was not the message, and there was no seeking clarity when they perceived it that way, and I really didn't care. I realized that there was the capacity for that to be perceived that way. But it was kind of one of those, if that's how you choose to see it, then that's how you choose to see it. And it's not my responsibility to do that work to change your perspective, yeah. Which previously I had always felt responsible to help people, like, adjust perspective to see things differently. And so then that led to, still to this day, I haven't spoken to one of my brothers. A couple of texts, maybe. I don't think I've talked to him outside of a group. They revived our sibling group chat, which just, I don't know. It's weird. And then the other brother and I had a huge falling out a few months back. And he hasn't really said too much to me, but I've also not said anything to him. But I've also been like, this is just the way it is. And then my sister and I we're the only ones with children, and so it's always been important to me to try and maintain my relationship with her, if nothing else, than for my niece and nephew. But also because she was the one that, like, even as a kid, I remember being, younger than Scarlett and wanting to run away from home. And so my sister must have been 2, so I was probably about 7 at the time, 7 or 8, and being like, she was the only reason I didn't, like, I would have literally run away from home. And looking back, knowing myself, I know I would have done it. But I remember being so angry, and then looking at her and being like, what a shitty sister I would be if I left you here in this without me.
Yeah.
And because my older brother was just not emotionally developed enough to look out in that way, and my younger brother was young, and so I truly always had a sense of responsibility to them, and that was the first moment I released myself from it. And so then I released myself in a way that perhaps I didn't handle it the best, but I handled it the best that I could at that point in time. And I was just like, if they have any ability to put another person before themselves, then they will take up the torch of carrying this relationship.
Yeah.
And my sister was the only one who, in her own way, did that. But she communicated to me many months later, that she apologized about the way that she was distant and expressed her own situation and stuff. And so it's just, I think we're all still just navigating the reality. And I had leaned into believing the facade that my mom had always, because when I was real young, it was always like us, and then my dad was the bad guy. And if we survived him, then like it was all good. But then when I was 16 was when she finally left him. But it wasn't until she met my stepdad. So she left my dad. It was horrible. And then she went off and got married, and then was like, y'all go figure out life.
Yeah.
And even through that, I still convinced myself, like, she's finally happy, all these things. And it wasn't until this experience, and I realize now why I had to have the experience the way that I did, because I don't think I would have ever. I am such a, like, devoted type of person.
Yeah.
Like, even with you, where I'm like, I don't want to be married to you anymore, but I still care about you, and I still care about your well-being, and I want to help you grow into the person that you truly are. And with my mom, I always wanted to help her grow into who she really was and who I remembered her being from when I was like a young child, before she just completely lost the light in herself.
Yeah.
And I held on to that and that memory of her for so long that I convinced myself that it was still in her.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until this experience that I realized it wasn't, because she sent that text message, and then any other communication was just her denying things. She didn't kick him out until my youngest brother, who still lives at home, demanded that she kick him out.
Yep.
And she called me 5 months after, and she said, I'm sorry that I didn't call sooner.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Let's take a quick pause right there. This is a two-parter, absolutely, for sure. And we will come right back. We just got kids to check on and a couple things to do, and we're going to do a second
No one
part.
needs explanations.
Yes, they do. All right.
Okay.